Thank you so much for joining me in this discussion about learning and development. For the record, I just want to introduce myself, that you know me, but my name is Linda McKay, and I teach a data management class. I've taught for a big data trunk, and we're seeing a lot of challenges and interesting things happening in training in the L&D world. And the reason I wanted to talk to you is I'm wondering what you're seeing and how your world has been changed. So I know we're going to talk about the pandemic because, of course, that changed everything. But before we do that, um, I'll talk about maybe what was in existence before, and then we'll get to the pandemic. But before we start any of that, so can you introduce yourself and just give me a little bit of background on what you do and what you do at Stanford?
Sure thing. Yeah, my name is Don Cameron. I'm with the Stanford University Technology Training Group, and I'm the instructional design lead within the team. So I've been at Stanford now for about 24 years. Been within inside this group for tech training for the past 22 years, and I started off as a admin, and then worked my way up to being the marketing coordinator, to the class coordinator, to finally the instructional design lead. Where in
Mm-hmm.
my current role, what I do is I work with all of our instructors, including I teach a number of classes about collaboration on campus,
Mm,
which you can imagine over the past couple of years, people learning how to collaborate now that they are working remotely or now in a hybrid situation. Some of the best practices are things that we've been teaching in our classes. And so it's something we've been having to carry over. And like for the different tools we teach, how can we use this to make sure there is continuous and streamlined communication within people on the team, and also the manager and the people who are working
right.
on different projects.
So, Don, are you saying that you were teaching collaboration before the pandemic?
Oh yes, I've been teaching
Okay,
now for the past 8 or 9 years or so.
interesting.
And
Okay.
yeah, I started off teaching like some in-person classes, and for the past 6, 7, 8 years or so, I've been doing nothing but in-person classes. So
Mm-hmm.
as of that March of 2020, when we moved everything to online, that changed a lot for us. We're doing some online classes. I was teaching some classes live online, but not
Mm-hmm.
too many. But then we had to move everything to online,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
so
I'm going to get to that because that's a everyone is affected by that, and it's interesting to see how people. It's almost like our experience of the earthquake. It's like the day that you find out that your world has changed, and it was a big day, a big moment for everybody. So we'll get to that for sure. Before
mhm.
we do that, so can you talk a little bit about your goals or your department's goals for what you do at Stanford? What are your objectives in your L&D world?
Sure. Our main objectives within the technology training group is just to provide training that people need to further their careers and become better at their positions, like better at their jobs. Like when you come into something, you sometimes have a new tool that you have to learn. Maybe something is introduced, something is being sunsetted or going away or being retired. And for these new tools and for everything that's coming down the road, people are always looking for what can I utilize to
Hmm.
make my job or make myself more efficient in my job. So that's our
Right.
main goal, is to keep on top of these different type of tools and provide training for it and ways that make it more efficient for people to attend, whether it be live online or
Hmm.
slowly getting back to in-person classes again.
Right, right. But the goal is to get anyone who's interested into the classes that they need, it sounds like. Now, are you seeing a change
Yes.
before the
So,
pandemic? I'm sorry. Were you seeing a change? And because one of the things we're seeing is there's this category of people now called lifelong learners, which everyone has to be. So the training before might have been, well, you have a new system and you have to learn the new system, but now it's skills that might not be attributed directly to a system, but a competency that people need. Did you see that change already happening in your training?
yeah, before the pandemic, we would have people who would take classes who are fairly new to computers, and they're used to just pencils and papers, and they never worked much on computers. So we did have a competency level of the most they can do is turn something on and off and be able to type in an email. So there was a lot of handholding for types of classes like that. But since we moved on to the online classes, this is where it makes it tougher for people to get into those classes and
Mm,
not just get into them, but also to the know-how, how to run a
right.
Zoom, how to get into a Zoom meeting, and how to be able to share your screen. So from those classes, what we have to do is have specific parts of those classes where we help people who are new to this, like walk them through, handhold them through these, the certain aspects of the classes.
Right.
But also, we are providing some self-paced training, or there's self-paced training available also on campus for folks, and they
Mm.
just need to know about how they can get to this, who can they ask questions of, and because it's self-paced, that means that they can take it at their own pace and their
Mm.
own time, be able to try something over and over again and not feel like they're being lost or being left behind in the class.
Well, that's
So,
interesting. When you talk about self-paced, um, so that would be, are we talking about online, obviously online sorts of
mhm.
classes, and if it's self-paced, then it would be uh, packaged material, prepared material, right?
Yes, prepared material or something similar to, say, like online training through LinkedIn Learning, something like that, where
Okay.
you have uh, certain training you can search for and be able to take self-paced training that way, or just do a quick online search. And there are so many companies out there that have tutorials or YouTube tutorials to
Mm-hmm,
help
mm-hmm.
you with, take something over and over again to make sure you get a chance to practice and not feel like you're being left behind.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I've taken a few of those myself. Some of them have turned out to be really excellent,
Yeah.
excellent courses.
I found they're very helpful, especially if I'm teaching a class. I like to look at these self-paced classes just to see, is there anything I'm missing?
Mm-hmm,
Is there
mm-hmm.
anything out there that is possibly new that I'm not aware of? So
So for you, it's training for you.
yeah, for me, I try to take as many classes as I can, especially the classes I'm already teaching, because I want to see how somebody else is teaching it and what can I
Mm,
glean from them? What can I learn from them to help improve my own teaching?
excellent, excellent. So you really enjoy teaching, it sounds like.
Oh yes, I love it.
Yeah.
It's those moments of helping somebody who feels stressed when they're coming into a class. They have this low training self-esteem, and help
Mm,
them build into being more comfortable with what they're learning about or what they're training on.
nice, nice, nice. I'm sure that's much appreciated. So let's talk about Earthquake Day. Let's talk about March 2020. Tell me a little bit about your experience in the turmoil and just how you pivoted in that month.
What was interesting, as even starting in January and February, was a slow decline into people knowing that there is something out there, that we need to be more careful, need to have some distance, wear masks, lots of sanitation or hand sanitizers. And I would teach a class in person, and we would have people who would want to sit further away from each other because
Ah,
they're aware. This is like in February of 2020.
right.
And then that March, where it came down, where the all of Santa Clara County went to the stay-at-home order, we had to quickly pivot on a dime, turn on a dime, whatever the phrase is, to take all of our classes that were in person before and change everything to online.
Mm,
So this was an email out to all the learners, everybody who was signed up for classes, moving forward, because we had no end date for this, no end time.
that's right.
And also our instructors to let them know, okay, here's what we're doing, starting today.
Mm,
And yeah, so it was a learning path of reaching out to everybody, saying, okay, this class is now going to be online. And if you're not comfortable with taking an online class, let us know. We can drop you from the class. But knowing that you're not going to campus, you have to go to this Zoom link. And then we had our process where, what are we going to be doing every day to prepare people for this, to send out
mm,
Zoom links to
mm.
people who signed up for classes, what kind of pre-class work they have to do. One of the benefits of having an in-person class is you have machines that already have all of the software installed on it.
Right.
So now if it's a class that's you have to have a particular type of software, we have to make sure that people know they need to have this installed on their machine prior to the session. So we had all that on our list that we had to take care of, including the huge project of making sure that nothing gets missed, and have to check off each one of these boxes. And every day we had to do a quick check about what classes are coming up. Do they have the Zoom link? Do the instructors know what to do? And
Mm,
so yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a great learning experience.
yeah, trial by
Yeah.
fire,
Yes.
right?
And of course, as you can imagine, the first couple of classes, we would have people saying, I much prefer having an in-person class than a live online class. But then, as people got used to it and got used to the reality of where we were at the time, then those complaints became fewer and fewer as people realized that they had to, go with the flow.
Well, that's interesting. And as a person who taught a class in person and then online, we had challenges too. And because I consider myself a technical person, but the technical challenges in teaching an online class are very different than other kinds of technical challenges. And I never knew until I taught the class what I would be faced with because it was hard to test the reality of that. Did you run into
Mhm.
that with some of your other instructors?
Oh, yes, we had to think of it as a full pilot all the way for this. As the very first time, here is what we're going to learn from it. So
Mm-hmm.
we would have our staff members sit in on the classes
Mm,
and handle the chat inside the Zoom and just make sure that people with any kind of audio video issues are taken care of, especially with the instructor. And there are times where we would have a pre-run with the instructor, or like a pre-call with the instructor, just to make sure things
right.
were working well for them. But yeah, a lot of issues that came up, including instructors who were having trouble sharing, or maybe having trouble taking a look at the chat. Everybody, because we're working from home, we didn't have the setup we have here in the office, where we may have a big screen and then a small screen.
Mm-hmm.
But we
Mm-hmm.
had instructors teaching everything off of a small screen.
Oh gosh, yes.
And yeah, it was a good learning curve for that. Just a way for us to say, okay, here are what we can improve upon for next time. And then we keep on saying, okay, what worked well, what did not work well, based upon the evaluations for the class, and go from there.
Right, right. And now that you're moving, I guess we would call this a hybrid world, right? It's never going to be the same. I think we agree on that. Because some people really like the changes that happen.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a positive.
mhm.
When we're teaching classes in person, we need to have space for those classes. And
Ah,
we have
right.
a limited number of classrooms. And we also have people who are around campus who rent our classrooms.
Mm,
So every time we do scheduling, while scheduling, we have to have certain things in mind. We have to know the availability of the instructor and the availability of the room
right.
and make sure they both match up. Once we went to online only for those past 2 years, now we're slowly going into the hybrid situation where we are now. But when we were online only, we didn't have those concerns about the rooms. We could actually be running before, when it could only be, we only run 2 classes at a time because we only had 2 labs. We
Right.
could now hypothetically run, multiple, more than 2, 3, 4 classes at the same time, as long as the instructors were available.
Interesting. Interesting. And then, coming into this hybrid world, what are some of the permanent changes that you see? So I know we're still transitioning, so it's not really we haven't really completely, it's not over yet completely, but but you must also be seeing what changes you think are going to be permanent for what you do.
Yeah, the biggest thing that people are looking at is also security. And when we're in a class, or if you're sharing material online, you have to be very
Uh,
careful about what you're sharing inside of a class or inside of a meeting. So that was a big push for the tools like Zoom. It seemed like there was a new security update or new update in Zoom almost
oh
every
yeah,
week.
yeah, it's true.
And the interface in Zoom changed so much over the first 4 or 5 months as people were working online, and they're struggling to keep up with all the different issues that people are running into. People crashing meetings, or you can imagine like all the different security items that or the different security options available to us now inside of Zoom compared to what we had when we first started.
It's true.
But when it comes to our classes, the mindset that's changed now is the people can take a class from anywhere. So
Mm-hmm.
before, you had to worry about getting on campus in order to get to a place in time. You had to rush.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully the train wasn't running late. Hopefully there was no traffic. But now, the when it comes to the management, or any of your managers, bosses, whatnot, people are a lot more flexible when it comes to whether you can work from home or whether you're
Right.
working in the office.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, the biggest issue we had when we first started was people had to turn on a dime to have their work set up at home.
Right.
And that's where we had the people with just the small laptop. And I would be teaching classes for the first 2 months from the kitchen table with just a laptop and an old monitor that was able to salvage from work. And so now I have a setup in my bedroom where I have a desk and I have a microphone, a monitor, and much better setup now. But at the time, people had to do what they can to quickly be able to set everything up at home.
I'll have
And
to
so
ask you
that's
about your
when,
microphone.
yes. So I have a nice Rode microphone that I'm using,
Mm,
and it's really helpful to make sure things are clear in
hmm
classes.
hmm
Oh,
That's been a
find out.
challenge for me. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. So the permanent change then is your anticipation is you'll be going forward, you will be continuing to offer online. But what about mixed classes? What about uh, can you support a class that's both online and in person?
It was around, I think, the fall of 2020, or maybe even closer to 2021, where we were thinking about, okay, what are the possibilities here? Could we have a class where we could spread people out inside of a room, make sure they're 6 feet apart or so, and also have people online through Zoom?
Hmm
So there are some people at Stanford who have set that up for students, where you can see students who are in the classroom and students who are online. And I've taught a few classes like that myself. And it's something that is possible, but it's we're still learning about what can we do to continue to improve it. Because people who are remote, they may not be getting the same type of advantage of the people in the room.
Right.
Where the people in the room, they can see everything. They can see more of the um, like any kind of gestures that the instructor is making, where you may just be able to see my face in the training.
hmm hmm
But also, if people are having issues in the classroom, the instructor can go around and look over their shoulder at their screen and help them out.
Right.
Um,
Oh,
one of the
interesting. Yeah.
one of the fun things about the classes over Zoom is if somebody had a problem where it wasn't working for them on their screen, we would have to wait until the next break, and then during the break, I'd have them share their screen, and I'd walk through, what their issue is and get them caught up with the rest of the class.
Yes, of course. Of course. I hadn't thought about that. Especially if you have a class with a lot of people, that would be very difficult to manage.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
Speaking
Interesting.
of that, like there were some classes before where we would, have a limit of the people due to the size of the classroom. Now we don't have those limits. So we could
Hmm
have 30, 40 people in a class, but know that the more people you have, the more opportunity, or I should say, the more questions that people may have.
Right.
And so therefore you have to make sure either that we keep track of all the questions that people have and then do a follow-up email saying, okay, here are the questions that were covered, that were asked in the class.
hmm
Because it's could be hard to manage the time and also manage up to 30, 40 people in a class.
Right. Right. Interesting. You'd almost need like a follow-up, not just for the questions, but for some of the hands-on that you're
Mhm.
describing, where you need to see what they're doing in order to answer their question. You might need more time to do that. It's an interesting, I hadn't thought about that. So it works
Yeah.
well in webinar type classes where
Oh,
you're
yes.
just, yeah, okay, okay, okay.
Especially over Zoom webinars where they have the Q&A. And
Right.
if you're recording the session, you're able to also record and keep that Q&A afterwards, and then be able to refer back to it and say, put all the questions on let's say, in a Google Doc.
Mm-hmm.
Go
Mm-hmm.
do a Q&A on that Google Doc and share it out to everybody who's in the session.
Interesting, interesting. And are you doing webinars as well as just a regular Zoom training?
It would depend on the size of the classes.
Right.
If I have a class that has about 100 people in it, then I recommend doing it as a webinar,
Mm-hmm.
because as a webinar, then it's less like during a regular class. So I can take a step back here. During a regular class, we have a lot more opportunity for questions throughout and a lot of interruptions throughout the session.
Right.
But when it comes to webinar, there are so many more opportunities for those distractions or interruptions for a class. So instead of giving people the opportunity to unmute themselves, they can then post any questions inside the chat, knowing that there's always a chance we may not be able to answer that question in the chat, but it
Right.
will be answered eventually.
Right. 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 It's probably just easier to manage. It sounds like, if you've got that number of people, it's just an easier thing to manage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
And
they changed on Zoom, they changed, you can't you can't unmute people. It used to be that you could control the muting and unmuting, but that was I missed that.
Yes, now we just have to, we can only ask them to unmute themselves.
That's
Uh,
right. That's
but
right.
as they host, though, at least you can mute them, though. So if somebody does
Yes.
come into the session, that's one of the small things we had issues with, or not issues with, but new instructors who are new to Zoom, they would sometimes forget to mute somebody, or somebody
Yes.
would accidentally unmute themselves, and then we'd hear those fun background noises that we get unintentionally.
We all know a lot more about each other, don't we, in our personal lives, our pets, our kids. Yes.
Oh, yes. One of the things we like saying about in the classes we teach is that, if your camera on or your camera off, if you have your camera on, that means we have more of an opportunity to learn more than we want to know about the person, especially if we see a kid in the background, or if a pet just walks in front of the screen. And when I was teaching classes in the kitchen, my cat would think, oh, great, that means he's here to feed me.
That's right.
So yeah, they would be meowing throughout, and I'd be having to tend with the meowing while also at the same time teaching the class.
Well, what's funny, when it first started, everybody was trying to cover that up, like that isn't happening, and hide the cat and
Mm.
hide the kids. And then it seemed like after a year or so, people were much more relaxed. The cat would go across the screen, and
Yeah,
we just didn't worry about it so much. We were less worried about how it looked. I think everybody was relaxed a little bit more into that.
yeah, it adds more to it. In fact, it adds to the conversation.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very much more personalized, right?
I was actually part of a conversation about 4 or 5 years ago about what would happen if there was a disaster, if there was something that forced people to work from home. Would you
Hmm.
be able to? Would you be able to do that tomorrow?
Wow,
And so,
prescient.
the biggest, yeah, the biggest thing that came up from that was yes, but how would I have access to all my files, all my papers? And
Oh,
so that's
interesting.
why nice being able to save everything in the cloud these days, make it much easier.
Yeah.
And yeah, so when working from home, or I should say working remotely, we had to learn more about those type of tools, and less about preparing handouts for classes to print and give to people, but more about providing a PDF, or providing
Hmm.
a file during the session or after the session.
Hmm. Yes, yes. The burden of printing got distributed, didn't it? I mean, if you have a class of 30 people, you're sending it out, and 30 people are printing it if they need it, not 30 copies. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So, is there anything more you want to say about the pandemic, or how your world is changing? I have some more questions about just your own path with L&D, but is there something more that you'd like to talk about in terms of the changes that have you've seen in the last 2 years?
Let's see, when it comes to the pandemic and the changes in the past few years, people are a lot more, as you mentioned, relaxed online now,
Mm, hmm.
and they're a lot more forgiving too.
That's true, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is forgiving about it's the background noises, or even forgiving about let's see here. It, it's more relaxed. I think is the biggest thing to take away from this. Before we used to be very rigid when it comes to meetings, being here and having everything ready for us. But now it's like, oh, somebody comes into a meeting, or somebody comes into a class and don't have the material. We can't blame somebody for maybe missing an email. So this is where we have to make sure we have these resources available where we can
Right.
share them quickly through the chat. So it's just more like being able to do things on the fly as well.
And that's true. And the other thing I've noticed in teaching, the first class I taught online, I was so worried about making a mistake. And then later on, if I made a mistake, everybody in the class could tell me how to fix it, because everyone was so much more knowledgeable about, what had to happen, right?
Yeah.
It was,
Uh,
a lot of Zoom
another thing I've
experts.
learned, yeah, another thing I've learned is that the answer is always in the room. So
Mm,
there are times where somebody would ask a question in the class, and if I'm not sure of the answer, I would say, let me check in, just double check, make sure I'm correct, and get back to you on this. But there may be some people who may have discovered some workaround for something that's not working for you, and that's where they feel comfortable speaking up.
hmm.
One question I had for you, and something you may have noticed over the past couple of years, is how do you feel about people who don't have their cameras on
Oh,
and set up as well?
well, go ahead. Tell me, finish the question. I have a strong feeling about that.
I'll give you just my quick opinion here. I want to see your opinion as well. I feel that people see this as a way for them to feel more relaxed during the classes, but also more engaged to ask questions, especially inside the chat. They don't feel like everybody's staring at them while they're asking the question.
Mm,
And so, but when people don't have the cameras on, and I've taught classes before with 16 to 20 people, and not one person would have their camera on. So it feels like sometimes like you're doing a podcast, and you know that somebody's out there listening, but it's only inside the chat where you can actually know that they're still there and still engaged. But what are your thoughts on that aspect of Zoom?
well, I have an opinion on everything. That's just my personality. But I like the cameras on. I like the cameras on because I it's a way of staying engaged. Now it's more difficult, as you know, when you're teaching because you don't get the full screen. I've got my documents or slides or whatever. Often I'm not seeing the whole thing. But I what I found is that in a class you'll have people that just don't engage. You have
Mm-hmm.
to constantly reach out to them, and when I can see their cameras on, it's easier for me because I see a facial expression or a reaction. If I don't have anything to work with, then I just feel like sometimes I'm leaving people out of the discussion. I'm not. If I were in the classroom, I would know how to do that through. I would see the body language. I would see whatever I need to see, and I could re-engage them. And so without cameras, I don't have any way of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I prefer the cameras on.
Yeah,
I
I go
understand.
either way because I know sometimes if people don't have their cameras on, it could be because if the camera is on, it could be slowing down their system.
That's true. That's true. And I often tell
Mhm.
people as a workaround to bad internet to turn the camera off. Yes.
Mhm.
But then come back in occasionally. I have strong feelings of much stronger feelings about it when it comes to meetings than I do about
Oh,
teaching.
yes. Yeah.
So in a meeting, if you have your camera off, well, I'm sorry, go away. I don't think you're engaged at all. I'm a lot less cut and dry when it comes to classes. My preference is the cameras on.
Yeah, one thing I like to do in classes to keep people engaged is I don't call people out. Like I don't say, Linda, what do you think is the answer to this? If I make an example of something, like say that if I'm saying I'm sharing a document, and let's say I share this document to Linda, and then Linda gives me this, then that person in the class was like, oh, he's mentioning my name. And so they feel like they're more engaged now in the class. So they're paying a little more attention just in case if they weren't. So even if I don't see
Right.
their camera on, I still like
Yes.
to call people's names as examples without actually putting them on the spot.
Don, that's really great. I found that also to be very effective because in the beginning of the class, often I try to find out what their goals are for the class, what
Mm-hmm.
their overall questions are, so I get a sense of who they are, and then that gives you a way to come back and say, David, this was one of your concerns, and here's something to
Exactly.
address it. But you're absolutely right. Um, but that is a challenge. That is a challenge I think everyone faces in the online classes is how to make sure that the people who are attending your class are engaged
Mm-hmm. That's
because you
one of
do
the
miss.
benefits of the. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
I was just going to say you missed that. I missed the visual. I missed the body language visual. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the benefits of the chat is that if I ask people to introduce themselves inside the chat, then let me know your name, your department, and what's number one reason why you're here, or what's number one challenge you have coming into this class. And then during the class, I can scroll up to the chat and I can always check to see, okay,
Mm.
Dave said this, so here's where I can point this as an example and bring it back to Dave.
Yeah, that's true. I will admit that sometimes I find it challenging to manage the chat as well as the presentation as well as the visuals. Sometimes it's a lot to take in
Mm-hmm.
when you're trying to go through your own material. So sometimes what I do is I print the chat out and and I have a way of referring to it. So yeah, lots of
And,
challenges, lots of new challenges in this kind
and
of
that,
teaching.
as you can guess, I could talk about this for the next half hour to an hour or so. It's one of those things I really enjoy talking about. What can we do to improve? Like, what kind of things can we pass on to help each other out? Any kind of tips? But
Well,
I don't want to go too deep into that.
that's no, that's fine. In fact, I was just gonna do some wrap up, and that's exactly what I was gonna ask you. You talked a little bit about your path when we first started about your path to L&D, um, and and it sounds like some of the strategies you use for staying on top of the challenges is just. It sounds like you think a lot about this. That you think a lot about how to be more effective at this. So that's how. And then I like the idea that you're actually teaching yourself because you experience kind of the challenges that other instructors have, and does that change? Do you think that changes what you put together in terms of your own training and the things that you offer? Like
Oh,
how does your
definitely.
own teaching affect how you deal with other instructors?
So I learn from my own mistakes, and I learn from seeing or watching other people talk or other people teach. And so that's why evaluations and feedback is very important to me.
Hmm.
The feedback, my favorite kind of feedback is not the ones where people give all fives and great class,
I agree.
but the ones where they give you twos and threes, and then they let you know, okay, here is what worked well, here's what didn't work well. And I save those feedback and I refer back to that feedback next time I'm teaching the class to
Hmm.
see, okay, this person said that I took too much time on this and too little time on this. What can I do to improve upon that? And so that kind of feedback is something I also like to pass on to other instructors. So I like to meet with our new instructors after each class, after their first class, I should say,
Right.
just to give them the feedback and talk about, get their feedback as well. What do you think went well? What do you
Yeah.
think did not go well? And what can we do to improve? And then we have a discussion and then really makes them feel more comfortable going into the next class,
Hmm.
knowing that we went over what went well and we weren't like we had the whole compliment sandwich, like here's what
Right.
went well, the
Yes.
good, the bad, and the good.
That's great. That's great.
And yeah, it's just a way to continue to work with the instructors to continue to improve, and that's where the feedback's very helpful for us.
Well, Don, it's been a pleasure to talk to you because you enjoy your work, and that's always a pleasure to talk to people that enjoy their work. And my last question will be, and I think I asked this earlier about the pandemic, but just overall, is there something that I haven't asked you that you would really like to have a chance to chat about?
Oh, let's see here. I was thinking about that question earlier. Well, I guess the one thing is, what can we do to continue to improve? And
Mm,
that's my number one thing is I haven't taught the perfect class yet,
mm,
and I always want to improve upon my last class I taught. And so
mm.
this is where the lifelong learner is what we strive to be because there's always so much more out there. So I guess the question that, or to the answer to the unasked question is about the what can we do moving forward? And that's by
Yeah.
take as much training as you can, especially on your own topics, just to see what other people are teaching and how other instructors are managing the classes, managing the material, and see
Mm,
what you can from what went well and what did not go well with them.
hmm.
And also just keep on opening yourself up to feedback and keep on joining into conversations whenever you can online, whether it be through LinkedIn, whether it be through any kind of online channels where people are discussing what's coming up in training, just so you can keep on being aware of what's coming up down the road.
That's great, Don. That's how you stay on top of what you do, and that's great. Well, I have no more questions for now, and I'm sure I've got 1,000 questions, but I think I'll cut it off. And thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you very much for